Okay.
Well, good evening, everybody from London, and welcome to another Harif Zoom event. My name's Lynn Julius, and I'm assisted by Lawrence on the technical side. Harif's mission, if you don't know about Harif, is to raise awareness of the history and the culture and heritage of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. Our website is www.harif.org. Our Zooms go out every 2 weeks on average, and they are free. You just need to subscribe to our mailing list, which you can do by visiting our website. We've also got a sister website, which is actually a blog, a news blog, which keeps you up to date with the news about Jews from Middle Eastern and North African countries. And that is updated every day, and it has about 7,000 articles on it. And that too you can subscribe to, and you will get a daily post. This session is being recorded, and we hope to have it on our video channel within a matter of hours. And please do take a moment to browse through our archive of videos because we've been broadcasting since 2020, and we've got quite a collection now on all different topics. There will be an opportunity to ask a question or make a comment, but please do put your question or your comment in the chat at the bottom of the screen. And if you do want to ask a question, please do make sure that you use your real name and not Wonder Woman or Superman. So on to tonight's event, which was actually prompted by the statement by President Trump that he wanted to move Gazans out of Gaza and he wanted them to be resettled in other countries. But it occurred to me that this whole discussion about Gazans and refugees needs to be really set in its historical context. And of course, the Jewish refugees are part of this. And little notice has been taken of the fact that there were Jewish refugees from the Arab states who were mainly resettled in Israel. So I'm very pleased to introduce a real expert in this field, and he has made a study of this topic, and we are very keen to find out his perspective. Shaul Bartal is a research associate at the Begin-Sadat Center for Strategic Studies, Ilan University, and he also lectures at the Instituto do Oriente, Universidade de Lisboa in Portugal. And he is the author of several books. Perhaps I shall just mention a couple of them. Jihad in Palestine, Political Islam and the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict, which is published by Routledge. And he also wrote a book on Hamas and ideology, Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, on the Jews, Zionism, and Israel, also published by Routledge. So, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Shaul Bartal for his presentation, which will last about 45 minutes, and then there'll be an opportunity for questions. So, welcome, Shaul. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much. First, I have to say thank you also for Lynn and Harif to present this presentation and present this story that I will speak about the refugee problem. Let's start I have to say something. When we are when we are talking or starting discussion about refugees, especially in the Middle East, we must first know the definitions, especially in the case of the Israeli-Arab conflict, because there are a large number of definitions by various bodies. So first thing, we will go to the United Nations, but oops, in United Nations, there are also different definition of refugees, especially if they are Jews and Palestinians. The accepted global definition, and this is what you are seeing right now, of the United Nations, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, and this is from their website, is saying something like this. Everybody has the right to seek asylum and find safe refuge, having fled violence, persecution, or war at home. It means that, of course, all the Jews from 850,000 Jews from Arab countries, they are refugees, and also the Palestinians, according to this definition. And if we are continue with what is the refugee, according to the United Nations, Article 1 of the 1951 Convention defines the refugee as someone who, owing a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership, or particular social group or political opinion, is outside the country of the nationality and unable or owing to such a fear. What is interesting, of course, this definition could be for all the Palestinians that flee in 1948. Look, I'm really focused in 1948, and also could exactly the details of the Jews from Arab countries that flee from 1948 and even before in some cases. In Libya, it was in 1945, for instance, till the 60s and even the 70s. Regional refugees instruments complement the 1951 Convention and have built upon its definition by referencing the number of objective circumstances compelling refugees to flee their countries of origin. For example, the definition outlined in the 1969 Organization of African Unity Refugee Convention include external aggression, occupation, foreign domination, or events seriously disturbing public order. The 1984 Cartagena Declaration includes generalized violence, foreign aggression, intended conflicts, massive violations of human rights, or other circumstances which have seriously disturbed public orders. So, this is the definition of refugees. And look about this map. I hope that you could understand what you're looking, but those are the area that we are dealing with. It's been all the Middle East. In 1948, in this area, were about 1 million Jews. Today, if we are not including Iran, there are less than 3,000 or 4,000 Jews, most of them in Morocco and Tunisia. They are the only Jewish communities that you could describe them as a community in the Arab world, in North Africa. It is absolutely clear that Jews from our countries are, by definition, entitled to be defined as refugees, but there are, like everything else, a number of problems with this issue. First and foremost, when does a person choose to be a refugee? It's a really good question, because in the Palestinian case, it looks like it's forever. But what happening in our side? And according to the United Nations, to the global organization, those are the definition. Only a first generation who fled and suffered a persecution is recognized as a refugee. The second generation, not. The third, exactly not. It means that all the Palestinian refugees that born in refugee camps or even born outside Israel and get citizenship in some cases, like Jordan, for instance, they are not refugees according to the United Nations global definition of refugees. Those who have received citizenship in their place of residence are no longer entitled to refugee status. Those involved in terrorism are not entitled to protection afforded to refugees. In some cases, people that belong, I have to say, you understand that my focus it's not about Jews in the Middle East. My focus mainly it's in Arabs. And in every refugee camp, you could find a lot of terrorist organization and people that belong to terrorist organization. Fatah in the beginning was started as a refugee organization. Hamas leaders also come from the refugee camps. And if you belong to terrorist organization, you could not be, according to the global definition of the UN, to be described as a refugee. You are a terrorist, you are not refugee anymore. And if we continue, this is according to UN's own definition in relation to 15 million refugees, because according to the United Nations, there are 122 million people that they describe them refugees, but this is also include the 6 million Palestinian refugees of UNRWA. Most of the Palestinians who are called refugees today, as I mentioned, don't meet the definition of the global definition of refugees. What is the difference between a Syrian, Ukrainian, or Sudanese refugee and a Palestinian refugee who fled or was expelled in 1948? The only difference is that the UN chose to establish, in a very unusual way, an independent UN agency that deals only with Palestinian refugees and their descendants. This is a move of discrimination and clear inequality by the UN, which even if it had justification in the past, has not any justification today. Look, this is from UNRWA website. Today, after Trump cut some of the aid that he gave UNRWA, and even a lot of it, now they are saying about Islamic philanthropy, and they say, pay you zakat, it's tzedakah, pay you zakat, charity, to our organization, because we are working with the Muslim community, Islamic communities, and about the Palestinians. So now they are trying to get more zakat for survive after Trump cut the money. The number of refugees today, according to the UN data, as I told, is over 122 million people. It may surprise you, but Jews are not recognized as refugees, but 6 million Palestinians are still defined as refugees. This is from the United Nations High Commissioner, the refugee. This number doesn't include reference to the Jewish refugees who today, together with their descendants, number nearly 5 million Jews, most of whom live in Israel. One of these descendants is, I have to tell something, it's interesting, is me. I am the second generation of a mother who fled from Tunisia to Israel via Italy following the pogrom in the Jewish community in southern Tunisia in October 1956. If the date sounds familiar, it is because it was during the Suez War. My grandmother told me the story about how she ran away to save her life. In terms of international law, The UN has made several references to the problem of Jewish refugees from Arab countries. In Israel, November 3 has been recognized as the annual day for remembrance for the expulsion of Jews from Arab countries, 1 million more or less Jews that lived there. The date was a symbolic set for November 30, the day after the November 29, or as we said it in Hebrew, Kaftet November, and they choose the day November 30 to describe that this is the November 30, it's the day after the 181 UN General Assembly Declaration on the establishment of the Jewish state in the land of Israel. This is the reason why Israel Knesset decided this date. The partition plan, Resolution 242 of 1967, also deals with the solution of the refugee problem, and in terms of international law, refers to the solution of both the Jewish refugee problem and the Palestinian refugee problem. Before we continue further into this issue, let's take a look on the Palestinian refugee problem. So what is the difference? But first, we must understand what is the definition of a Jewish refugee according to the Israeli law and international law. Experts like Canadian jurist Erwin Kotler say that it's still in act. On February 32, 2010, a law called the Law for the Protection of the Rights of Jewish Refugees from Arab Countries and Iran to the compensation. A Jewish refugee is someone who meets all of the following. First, you have to be an Israeli citizen, including if he was a resident of the land of Israel before the establishment of the state. He was a resident of one of the Arab countries of Iran and left, among other things, due to persecution because of his Jewishness and being defenseless against such persecution. He left his country of origin in his possession. It states that within the framework of negotiation to achieve peace in the Middle East, the law includes the issue of providing compensation for the loss of property of Jewish refugees from our countries and Iran, including property owned by a Jewish community in these countries. In the Article 1 wrote in 2012, I argue that, as I will explain later, that in fact the problem of the Palestinian refugee has already been solved. Why? Because what happened in the 50s was population exchange, and we could explain it and prove it. What is interesting about this law is that it doesn't define whether Jewish refugee is passed down from generation to generation. For example, if only my mother defined as a refugee as someone who fled to save her life from Arab riots in Jarash in Tunisia, or does it also include me as her children, who are Israeli children or other Israeli citizens who live in Israel? In any case, the law refers to the compensation that Jews from Arab countries are supposed to receive for the property they left behind. In other words, Israeli law recognize compensation that will one day be given to the descendants of the original Jewish refugees from Arab countries. In the last decade, several pioneering studies in the field have begun to publish such as this study that discuss Arab and Islamic anti-Semitism towards Jews. The study, which refers to Tunisia, that you could see in the left, argued that the main reason for anti-Semitism in the measures of persecution against Jews is not Zionism, but the identification of Jews with European colonialism, especially France, if it's in the case of North Africa, at least in Tunisia. What is special about this study is that it was conducted by a Tunisian professor who examined the official archives of the Tunisian government from 1940s, from the 40s and 50s. In the right, you could see also a kind of Islamic anti-Semitism. To those who read Arabic, Allahu Akbar, الموت لأمريكا, الموت لإسرائيل, اللعنة على اليهود, النصر للإسلام. اللعنة على اليهود, it means curse to all the Jews. And this, of course, the symbol of the Houthis from Yemen. For those who say that we have right of return to the Arab world, again to the Arab countries. Now let's discuss the Palestinian and try to understand the parallel. The number of Palestinian refugees, like everything else in the Israeli-Arab conflict, is disputed. The numbers range from 600,000 people, according to Israeli scholars and other studies, to 800,000 people, according to Palestinian studies. In some cases, I saw also Palestinian articles that say it was around million people that run away, or Israel or the IDF drove them out from the country, as they described it. Usually, many rely on the UN data from 1949, which speaks of about 700,000 displaced person, Palestinian. The number of Israeli refugees from Arab countries is also disputed and range from 800,000 to 900,000 Jews. It is usually calculated as about 850,000 Jewish refugees from Arab countries. At least 550,000 of them come to Israel and resettled in Israel. In terms of time of the refugee, Palestinian refugee, according to UNRWA definition, are anyone who was displaced from their homes from the UN resolution of November 29, 1947 until the end of Israel War of Independence. The armistice agreements between Israel and the Palestinian authorities signed in 1949. Israeli refugees, according to what happened, are all those who fled Arab countries as a result of anti-Semitism before and after establishment of the State of Israel. The Israeli definition refers to the refugees of 1948, the refugees of 1956, like my mother, the Jewish refugee of 1967, and the Jewish refugee of 1973, and so on. It's also in the Jewish refugee from Iran in 1979. However, most of the Jewish refugees from our countries were mainly in the 50s. Palestinians actually have two definitions of the term refugees. And this is also something interesting because there are some difference between them. The first definition, it's UNRWA definition, United Nations Work and Relief Agency for the Palestinians. Any person who lived in the mandatory Palestine in the 2 years prior to May 15, 1948 and was displaced from his home. This is from their website. And there is another Palestinian of the PLO, and also Hamas use it. Any Palestinian who fled Palestine as a result of the establishment of the State of Israel or action taken by Israel. It's no matter about time, it's no matter about anything, it's no matter when you go, it's no matter if you have another nationality, it's no matter anything. You run away from Israel, even if it was 1 month before the war, you run away from Israel, is a refugee. There are other definitions of the term refugee, but in general, these are two main distinctions. According to the first UN definition, there are about 6 million refugees, Palestinian refugees today. The figure includes all refugees registered in 1950 in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, including the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. There are no refugees registered in Iraq or other countries outside this area. But look about this I don't know if you could understand, but according to the Palestinian definition, to the second one, there are like 8.5 million Palestinian refugees in the world. It means that all the Palestinian people, according to Palestinian figure, is around 11 million. So it means like most of the Palestinian people is refugee, according to the Palestinian researchers. This is something from Zaytuna Center, a research center that placed in Lebanon, in Beirut. I take it from there. Usually it's pro-Hamas. The difference between UNRWA's approach and the Palestinian definition of the PLO and Hamas is the difference of almost 2.5 million additional refugees. What is the difference between the two Palestinian approaches, or if you like, between the official Palestinian approach and that of UNRWA? The main difference lies in the concept, what is registered refugee? A registered refugee is a refugee recognized by UNRWA. Non-registered refugee is all the others. This is the usual way to describe the difference. For instance, there are Palestinian refugees in Iraq. There are refugees according to the PLO. There are not refugees according to UNRWA. Also, there are Palestinian refugees in South America. That's it, that will settle there and get nationality and get even citizenship. But they continue to be refugees according to the PLO, but they are not refugees according to UNRWA. It doesn't include Arab countries such as Iraq, Egypt, Palestinians in Europe. I found also Palestinians in Italy in my last visit there. That not include also internal refugees among Israel. You know, in Al-Fahim, there are people that used to live, according to their family stories, used to live in Arab villages in Lejeune or other Arab that have been destroyed in 1948. They still call themselves refugees, Palestinian refugees, and according to the PLO and Hamas, they are still refugees. Even if it's only few kilometers from their place. In other words, what happened in the 50s was in fact a population exchange between about 850,000 Jewish refugees and about 600,000 or even 700,000 Palestinian refugees. To understand why almost 80 years later we are still talking about the Palestinian refugee problem, one must understand the rule of UNRWA. It must be said honestly that according to the criteria of the UN Refugee Agency, not according to UNRWA, the Palestinian refugee population doesn't meet the criteria for a refugee, as I already said. Some of them have been granted refugee status. In some cases, they live in ordinary homes and not in refugee camps. In fact, only in Lebanon and in Gaza Strip are the condition of the descendants of the Palestinian refugees poor. And in some cases, such in Syria and Iraq, they have been given Jewish property in order to rehabilitate themselves, to resettle themselves. They get Jewish property from the government to resettle because the Jewish left. And I will continue with this. UNRWA, which established by the UN resolution in 1949, with a temporary 3-year mandate, specifically to settle Palestinian refugees in their scattered countries, choose to participate in the refugee problem forever, because UNRWA don't want to continue to exist. It's surviving for UNRWA. A refugee includes his descendants from 1948 to the present day. Job seekers who arrived in mandatory Palestine in the 40s after World War II and remained there are also considered Palestinian refugees according to UNRWA definition. Since UNRWA budget comes mainly from Western countries, such as United States, Britain, and European Union, Trump's policies to cut the UNRWA budget are necessary for the future of this problem, as I will explain later. And we have to understand the right of return that the Palestinians said. The Palestinians based the claim on the Resolution 194. But let's read it carefully, this resolution. On December 11, 1948, the UN General Assembly adopted Resolution 194, with paragraph 11 dealt with the problem of the war refugees. As you could see, resettlement is also one of the solutions for the Palestinian refugees. And it's also a solution that the UN asked or have described as a just solution for the refugee problem. Arab countries opposed Resolution 194, at least in the 50s and the 60s, but agreed to the absorption of the Palestinian refugee and their resettlement in place of the Jewish refugees they expelled. The responsibility of Arab states for the issue. They created the Palestinian refugee problem when they invaded Israel on May 15, 1948, and shelled Jewish settlement during the War of Independence. They can't say we don't have anything to do with this. They expelled Jews of Arab countries, from Arab countries, some of whom had lived for about 2,000 years in Egypt and Iraq or in North Africa, for example. They confiscated the property of Arab Jews, and in some cases, such as in Syria, Iraq, and Egypt, they explicitly officially claimed that this property was Jewish payment for the Palestinian refugees. So if they already declared that, it means that everything already been settled, so we don't have any problem. We will give several examples. A magnificent and well-connected community of approximately 100,000 Jews will live in Egypt when the Israeli War of Independence began. As a consequence of the fighting, as well as the involvement of the Muslim Brotherhood in domestic politics, numerous actions against the Jewish, including riots, took place. The Muslim Brotherhood, led by Hassan al-Banna, began to describe the Jews of Egypt as a fifth column in the 30s. Some of you may not know, but the Mufti Haj Muhammad Amin al-Husseini, a good friend of Himmler and Hitler and the Nazi leadership, was appointed in 1946 to head the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine. In the Jerusalem branch, the Mufti founded the Jerusalem branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. You could see in the slide, in the right, you could see the symbol of the Muslim Brotherhood, Wa'adu or Quran, the two swords. Wa'adu, it's been prepared from Quran, Surah Al-Anfal, Ayah 16, verse 60 in Surah 8 of the Quran. But when the Muslim Brotherhood, of all the riots and all the things that they did during the period of the War of Independence, during 1948 and 1949, what happening was the picture in the left. It was very terrible, a kind of pogroms. You could see this is a picture from that time. The Mufti was a personal friend of Hassan al-Banna, and ultimately, according to the research I did into the Muslim Brotherhood perspective, it was the Muslim Brotherhood that instilled in the Egyptian public the feeling that the Jews of Egypt were traitors. Hundreds of Jews were summarily arrested, and in turn, exit visas for Jews were severely restricted. Looting and bombing become prevalent, As one eyewitness recalled, after the war broke out in 1948, my mother, who was in the 9th month of her pregnancy, was arrested. They wanted to butcher her. They had violence. They dust her, and afterwards they left her. On one of the evening, a crowd came with sticks and anything else that they could find in order to kill the family because they heard that they were Jews. The gatekeeper saw to them that we are Italians, and that is why they only caused surrounding my parents, my brothers, and myself, who was only a tiny baby. The next day, my parents fled. More than 25,000 Jews left Egypt without their assets following the 1948. After being attacked by Arab smooths, but with the Free Officers Movement caps in July 1952, more dramatic changes were soon to follow. Nationalist sentiments against Westerners had already resulted in writing against the foreign Jews. In the same week that the Egyptian Revolution broke out, further attack took place. As you understand, the Jewish that will live thousands, generation after generations of years in Egypt, become foreigners, become Westerns. They spoke Arabic like everyone else, but they are strangers. Jewish stores were robbed and Jewish property looted and burned. In the immediate aftermath of the officers' cup, there was an attempt by the Egyptian government to ally the Jewish community first, including the return of property seized after 1948 war. The government in Arab countries have always tried to show, at least outwardly, that are protecting their small Jewish communities, but usually without much success. This was the case also in Morocco, Tunisia, and other Arab places that gained independence. Every time after a pogrom against Jews, the government said, "We are dealing with this. We want to stop it. We're doing. We will find the people that disturb the public order and etc." At the same time, under the framework of the 1954 Alpha Plan, Washington and London attempted a Palestinian refugee resettlement program in the Sinai Peninsula. But this process was scuttled due to the escalation in Egyptian-Israeli tension. A resettlement plan for hundreds of thousands of refugees from the Gaza Strip in Egypt, with an emphasis of the Sinai Peninsula. To the large extent, Trump seems to have succeeded in returning the Israeli-Arab conflict to the 50s. However, in exchange for Egyptian agreement to settle the refugees in the 50s, the United States demanded that Israel give up part of the Negev in favor of land corridor with Jordan. These plans also occasionally resurface and is included in various political solutions, such as the Israeli plan to transfer part of the population in Gaza to Sinai. But that is not the issue. In any case, in the 50s, the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, led by the Muslim Brotherhood, opposed any attempt to settle them in Sinai. It looks familiar. Dwight David Eisenhower, who served as President of the United States from 1952, he was behind the Alpha plan, believed that Palestinian refugees should be resettled in Arab countries. This was why the United States increased the UNRWA budget and founded resettlement programs in Palestinian refugees. It may or may not be surprising, but Trump is simply giving an updated version of the Republican Alpha plan from the 50s. In 1954, the exposure of an Israeli spying in Egypt that had recruited Egyptian Jews, the so-called Lavon affairs, exacerbated ill feelings. The escalation of the conflict with Israel led Egyptian President Jamal Abdel Nasser to take a number of steps against the Jews in his country, including another roundup of suspected Zionism. the nationalization of the Suez Canal, which in turn resulted in the Sinai campaign of October 1956, marked the beginning of the end of the ancient Jewish community in Egypt. On November 22, 1956, all Egyptian Jews were defined as Zionists and labeled enemy citizens. The massive explosion of Egyptian Jewry began with the total confiscation of Jewish wealth. Some of these assets were given to the Palestinian refugees who were living in Cairo, and the rest went into the Egyptian state treasury. For example, the house of Charles Victor Castro, an exclusive home in the expensive Cairo suburb, became the official residence of Egyptian President Anwar Sadat. I could continue, but I don't think we have the time. But also the same story was happening in Syria, with the Jews of Syria also. As you could see, neighboring and apparently populated Syria was an ideal country for the mass resettlement of the Palestinian refugees. In April 1949, Prime Minister Hosni Zaim signed his readiness to sign a peace agreement with Israel in exchange for specific conditions, including substantial geographic concession. He explicitly informed U.S. representatives of Damascus' willingness to absorb and resettle over 250,000 refugees in its territory, at least 3 times more refugees than Syria actually absorbed in 1948. As you can see, Palestinians, according to Palestinian source, they feel like home in Syria. These are always refers to as those who are in effect Syrians. I could say also in the before 1920, before the Balfour Declaration, before the British mandate was accepted, the Palestinians who live in what we call Israel, the land of Israel, describe themselves as Syrians. They live in Syria and Janubia, the southern Syria. As I told you, it's the same story. About prosecution and confiscation of property, you could see the same story also. They take the property of the Jews in Syria. In Syria, it was even worse. You could see in the picture Eli Cohen, the Israeli spy in 1967, but usually after what happened in 67, all the Jews become enemy citizens, and also all their properties belong to the state. So if we want to continue, as I
Keep
and
going.
again,
Yeah, please keep going.
yeah, and again, everything was planned. We have to understand that everything was planned according to the Arab League. It must be constantly pointed that then in secret resolutions of the Arab League from 1949, two central decisions were made. First, encourage the Jews of Arab countries to live. It was something organized by all the Arab countries. And second, don't allow Palestinians to receive citizenship. The only one who divided from this was King Abdullah of Jordan, and today the Palestinians in Jordan are around 60% from the population. The dual refugee problem, this is what we have to understand. If we want to continue how to solve it, what is just solution for the refugee problem? Just solution for the refugee problem, I use the term that the Palestinian or Arabs usually term. We want just solution. In all the Arab religious solution, comments or sermons, they always describe in every time the two-state solution and just solution for the Palestinian refugee problem. All Jewish and Arab refugees should be resettled in the countries they come to. It's mean for me in Israel, for them in the Arab countries. Refugees who are liable to compensation and are defined as refugees are only first generation, similar to the generally accepted recognition of other refugees in the world. It means that descendants of refugees could get maybe some money, compensation, but they are not refugees according to the law. There is no right of return. Jews will not return to Arab countries, and Palestinians will not immigrate to Israel. Of course, there is not. As the nobody want 8.5 million Palestinian refugees or even 6 million Palestinian refugees to immigrate to Israel. The dual refugee problem was not solved by the Oslo Accords or the Annapolis Accords. During the Oslo period, the Palestinian starting point was that they are not to blame for the Jewish refugee problem. And this is Sai Barikat that saying this. The Jewish refugee can return to the Arab countries. As I wrote in my article, these attitudes of the Palestinians were expressed as early as the 70s by the PLO officials and on various radio channels. The Palestinians have a problem with Jews from Arab countries. The Jews from Arab countries now present 60% of 60% from almost 60% from the population of Israel. It's really difficult to describe Israel as colonized plain if we as Jews from our countries come from Arab countries, Jews that live in the Middle East for generation after generation. Now they're describing them as a colonist plain. It's really not serious. And I have to say, in every history book that the Palestinians write, they almost never describe or mention the Jewish from our states, because it's against their narrative that Zionism or Israel is a colonist project. It is clear that Jews have now nowhere to return. As of today, it's difficult to be a Jew in Europe, or at least in certain parts of Europe. During the Annapolis Accord, and I almost finish,
Okay.
Olmert was willing to discuss within the framework of the talk the limited return of some Palestinian refugees from 1948 as a humanitarian gesture, but in the end, the Annapolis process failed to achieve anything. And then I have to finish with this. The dual refugee problem was not solved by the Oslo Accord or the Annapolis Accord. I argue that, in fact, it has already been solved, and that Israel and the international community today owe the Palestinian nothing apart from humanitarian aid like any other poor population. The only thing that we have to continue dealing with is about equal compensation. If we discussed about it, equal compensation to the Jewish descendants from the Jewish refugees and their descendants from Arab countries, and also to the Palestinians. But I have to tell you, the Jewish properties by far are really more than what the Palestinians left behind them in 1948. So thank you for listening, and I really appreciate that you listening to this lecture. And if you have any question, I will be glad to answer.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Shaul. I thought that was an excellent overview of this question, which is so rarely discussed. We only hear about Palestinian refugees. We hardly ever hear about Jewish refugees. So thank you very much for that. So please do write your questions in the chat. My first question to you, Shaul, can you just stop sharing your screen? Is what evidence do you have for the 1949 secret resolutions that the Arab states passed to encourage their Jews to leave?
It was published in some, I could send you it, it's in Arabic. I could find it and send it to you. It described in one or two books that I found that dealing with that period of the 1948.
That's fascinating. Yeah. And was it the Arab League or was it individual Arab states?
No, the Arab League.
Arab League. Fantastic. And what would you say to people, to Palestinians who say that they are not to blame for what happened to the Jews from Arab countries? What argument would you put forward?
It's really interesting because, during the 50s, the Palestinians were represented by the Arab states.
Mm.
In Lausanne Conference, in my article, I also write about it in Lausanne, in Paris Conference, that tried to deal with the Palestinian refugee problem. They never have been represented, and they seek all the things about to the Arab states. They have delegation to the Arab states. They try to also maybe a small delegation try to get to get inside or to discuss to take part in the Paris conference to deal with the Palestinian refugees. But the only thing that the Arab states want in those two in the Lausanne conference and also in the Paris, they discussed with Israel about money. How much money Israel agreed to pay for resettle the Palestinian refugees in their home. We have to understand that during the 50s, the solution that most of the world in that time think it was that the good solution for the Palestinian refugee problem is resettle them around Israel. Even in Alpha Plane, they discussed about that Israel maybe should take or agree to some part, very small group of Palestinian refugees to come back, the oldest or women or something like this. But the majority have to be resettled in Jordan, Iraq, or other place around Israel.
And that was fascinating what you said about the Syrian Prime Minister who said in 1949 that he was willing to take the Palestinians into Syria. What was the reaction to this?
Yeah, Husni Zaim also have, the problem with this that Israel didn't succeed to examine it so much carefully because after 4.5 months, he was murdered by another cop.
Aha.
But he tried to get recognition in Syria. He tried to international and Western recognition in that time after in 1949. But the problem is that he didn't survive. We couldn't continue with this process. But
Mhm.
I think he was serious because Syria have a really good lot of land to resettle Palestinians. There is no much difference, even with the lahja, with the dialect. The Palestinian dialect is very close to the Syrian dialect and also close to the Jordanian dialect.
Mm.
They don't have, they even not have to be in Ulpan to learn another language.
Yeah, there's some discussion about the Hadid sisters, who are, for those who don't know, they are this very wealthy family who live in California, I think. I think one of them, Bella Hadid, is a model. I may be wrong
Yeah.
there. But they still define themselves as Palestinian refugees.
No, yes, you could continue to define yourself as a Palestinian, of course. You could live in the United States, but you are not a refugee.
Mhm. And
According
if
to the UN general definition, if you already have nationality in other state, you could not be any more refugee. So it means that all the refugees that UNRWA is still working with them in Jordan, it's more than 3 million people. Most of them even not even live in refugees camp, and some of them are very wealthy persons, and have companies, have working, have more money, and that are working all the economic life of Jordan. Most of the all the was held by Palestinians. That's by Palestinians who have Jordanian citizenship and settled in Jordan.
Yeah. So, but UNRWA is still looking after people who have Jordanian citizenship. As
Yeah,
a, yeah,
they
yeah,
have Jordanian citizenship. They are most of them wealthy. They are not living anymore in refugee camps, or if you want to say ma'abarot.
yeah.
They are not living in those places. And even refugee camps, we have to say, become more like neighborhood, nice neighborhood in very close to the main city.
Yeah,
Yarmouk, for instance, refugee camp is very before before the Arab Spring, before the revolt, was a nice neighborhood of Damascus, and even non-Palestinians will live there.
right. Well, would you say the Gazans have a right to claim refugee status?
The Gazans,
Yeah, the Gazan Arabs.
listen, right now they are, if they, according to definition, if they are run away from their homes, and this is what happened, they could claim that they are refugees according to the global definition.
Yeah,
They run away now, but they are not refugees because they are descendants of refugees from 1948.
yeah, yeah. So they should really come under UNHCR and not under UNRWA. Um,
Of course,
because they
UNRWA,
are refugees at the moment from the current conflict.
from the current conflict, they are they could be described refugees under the global definition of the United Nations. The
Right.
UN, yeah, and not under the UNO definition.
Yeah. Okay. So Victor Bentata says, fabulous presentation. Yes, we agree. We are unfortunately unlikely to change our non-refugee status. He's talking as, I think, a descendant of a Syrian refugee.
Yeah.
You're a Jewish refugee. But what can we do to use our expulsion from Arab lands to raise consciousness of the fact that everyone in this conflict is a refugee, whether Sephardi or Ashkenazi or Palestinian? So that's one question. And then he's got a question about property, documentary evidence of ownership of property, e.g., palaces in Syria. And he is a descendant of Farhi, which of course was the prominent family who had a palace in Damascus, along with the Lisbona and the Lanyado and Stambuli. And he's asking, is there a way to bring a group litigation for the recovery of such property?
Listen,
Um,
I know that the government of Israel, the Ministry of Law, I know that starting collecting, it's a project that started decades ago, collected a lot of materials, and there is a lot of documents that describing all the properties of Jews from our countries. So if you are going to Israeli law ministry or asking them, you could find a lot of documents that could help you, or maybe in the archive, you could find a lot of documents that could help you to find your assets or your properties and all the other things. There are also a lot of stories about evidence, testimonies that Jewish during that period, if you are looking in every Jewish community, for instance, in Yad Ben Tzvi Center, there are a lot of testimonies, books, and also nice research that described and take evidence of all the assets that the Jews left. Uh, so, for instance, you could start with those two places, Yad Ben Tzvi, and also from and also in the Israeli Minister for Justice.
Mhm.
I see a question.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think I'll just repeat Dr. Nissan's point, which is that Sisi offered parts of the Sinai to Mahmoud Abbas for resettlement, and he refused,
Yeah,
saying
near refuse.
Israel should make concessions, and then Sisi denied the offer was made.
Yeah, it was published in Jerusalem Post. I remember this. Also, it was published in Egyptian newspaper, but there they published that they not agree for this. They didn't say that Sisi offers something like this. They say that there is a claim like
Yeah,
this, but this is not true.
yes. But it may be happening, according to recent reports. The Egyptian government may be resettling Palestinians from Gaza.
Yeah, it's not the first time, but now I think the story right now is about 500,000 Palestinians from Gaza that will be resettled in Sinai.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And what do you think of the Israeli government in all this? Because obviously it's come in for a lot of criticism for treating the Jews from Arab countries as Zionists returning to the ancestral homeland. I mean, what do you think the Israeli government should be doing now on this question?
I think that the Israeli government already passed few laws that we could deal with them. The first one of those is the law that I already mentioned from 2010.
Yeah,
There is another law in 2014 that was passed about declaring about the November 30 as the annual day for the Jewish from our countries. Also, I think that the Israeli government in the last decades started to, in history, there are more history lessons and there are more awareness to the fate of the Jewish people that flee from Arab states, the Jewish refugees. I could say that if I remember right, during the 50s and the 60s and even in the 70s, it was not over to say that you are a refugee from our country. It looked like something not really, not really true because you are not a refugee. You come to your homeland. How could you describe you as a Jew that you come to Israel, you make aliyah. You don't say I immigrate to Israel in the Hebrew language. You don't say I'm immigrate. I make aliyah.
yeah,
I'm up. I go up to Israel. It's up of all the other states. I'm
yeah,
in my homeland.
yeah,
And today I think that today we have more awareness about the fate of Jewish refugees from our countries.
yeah.
And also I think that, we look what happening in Yemen. You asked me before about what you are saying about those who say that this is not blame or something like this. Some of Palestinians also say, they continue saying it, that you could go back to the place that you come from.
Mm,
For instance, it really be a good question if Jewish from Yemen now could go back to the place they come from.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I don't think so.
Well, there's a report that the last Jews are being deported from Yemen to Egypt. So this is the government. The government of Yemen is deciding to deport Jews. In other words, so much for returning to Yemen if they're going to be deported from it.
Yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah, yeah. It doesn't make sense. So comments that the presenter speaks about forced displacement of peoples, e.g., Jews from Arab countries and Arabs from Palestine. The 1951 UN Convention, as amended by the 1967 Protocol, recognized their legal status as refugees. The internally displaced people, asylum seekers, and stateless people. A refugee is someone whose status was assessed and determined by relevant authorities in a handful of refugee resettlement countries. Therefore, it is more accurate to use the term asylum seeker. So, what do you think about that, Shaul? Do you think we should be talking about asylum seekers rather than refugees? And of course, yes, I think we all agree that the definition used by UNRWA is an artificial one and shouldn't apply to the Palestinians or indeed any other refugees. So perhaps asylum seekers, I don't know.
Listen, I could tell you that the question with also the Jewish refugees from Arab countries also the United Nations also declared that in some cases agreed that they could describe the UN agreed that it could describe the Jewish the Jewish from Arab countries as refugees, but it didn't give them any status of refugees.
Mm, mm,
So even if according to declaration this or that, he agreed to declare that I think that the Jewish refugees from Arab countries, they are refugees. Okay,
yeah,
but what is the meaning? The Palestinians, for example, in the other hand, have something else. They have a different, a special agency that's dealing with them, giving
yeah.
them support, giving them education, giving them everything, and they accept all the world to finance those Palestinians generation after generations, and it will never end if
Mm,
we
mm.
continue with this case.
Yeah. How optimistic are you that UNRWA will be disbanded?
Listen, usually I'm not so optimistic, and also in that case. But what it happened, I think that in the end, uh, I don't. The problem with the UN right now is that in the UN there are 56 Arab states and a lot of other Arab states that supporting it, that supporting the Islamic world, the 56, the Arab world, and etc. And also the Palestinians and the Arab states see themselves as it's something in political science. They describe themselves as part of the global South. This is
Mm,
also a expression that they are using. So I don't see in one day that UNRWA will be closed, but I think that UNRWA will be, but something will be different. What will be the difference? I don't know. But UNRWA will not have the same size of budget that she have during that year. If Trump continue about what he's doing, in the end, maybe UNRWA become only something, that giving advice or
mhm.
working in other places, but not, for instance, in the West Bank or in Gaza or in other place. UNRWA could continue to be a kind of humanitarian organization that the United Nations continue to have. But according to the Israeli law, UNRWA is almost a terrorist organization.
Yeah, yeah. Or it'll be dependent on zakat anyway, like 100%.
This is the future of
Charitable
UNRWA.
donations. Okay, so Freddie says, I do not understand why Israeli governments refuse to bring up the issue of Jews from Arab countries as a counter argument. I think we all agree with you, Freddie. It is so frustrating. Every time you hear an Israeli government spokesman, they never mention Jews from
I,
Arab.
I, I really don't understand why, but Israeli government, the Knesset already passed some laws for
Yeah.
support it.
Mm.
But maybe there are things that we don't know.
Indeed. Okay. Well, I think we've probably come to the end of the questions here. And thank you very much indeed, Shaul, for a wonderful discussion. I think we've all benefited from sort of new insights. I thought I knew quite a lot about this subject, but actually you have taught me some new information. And I think we all agree it was a very good presentation. Thank you very much, Shaul. And
I'm
thank
really
you all
glad.
for
Thank you
your
so much.
questions and for your interest. Yeah, thank you. So, as is our custom, we will stop the recording, and we will just put up the future events that we will be having in the Harif program. I'd like to mention that Shaul's coming back to talk for Harif in May. He'll be talking about Tunisian Jews under Nazi rule in World War II. Um, as some of you might know, the Tunisian Jews actually came under direct Nazi rule for 7 months during World War II. So that should be a really interesting talk, and I look forward to this talk by Shaul, the second talk. And thank you very much. You're getting lots of compliments, Shaul.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for a brilliant presentation. So our next event is actually our pre-Passover event, My Exodus Story, when we'll be showcasing the stories of three Jewish refugees from Arab countries. And that's on the 8th of April. Then there's a discussion on Judeo-Arabic. A new book has been written about Judeo-Arabic, specifically Iraqi Jewish Arabic, and the problem of preserving this sort of culture. And here we are. Here's Shaul's talk coming up on the 20th of May. There will be another talk in May, at the beginning of May, about the Libyan riots of 1945, because we're coming up to the 80th anniversary since those riots, which I think are not really talked about. The 1945 riots, which killed almost as many Jews as the Farhud. So if anyone wants to make a point off the record,